Yeah.
Fine, I'll start us off. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's licensing subcommittee to consider the application for a premises license for the St Mildred's Bay. My name is Charlotte Crowley, and I'm acting as the meeting facilitator, and I will conduct the election of the chairman. Do we have a nomination?
I'll nominate Councillor Curry. Thank you.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Councillor Curry has been elected as the chairman of the licensing subcommittee for today.
Thank you, Charlotte. Welcome everyone to today's meeting of the licensing subcommittee. Prior to this meeting, all participants have previously checked that they can be heard and seen and can see and hear other members. To double check this and to introduce everyone who is present at this remote meeting, I would kindly ask that you confirm your attendance and your role or job title when I say your name. So with Councillor Ara. We know Councillor Ara's here. Councillor Huxley.
Yeah, I'm here.
Gavin Happ.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the committee's legal advisor.
Thank you. Officers, Alison.
Alison's mic's not working at the moment, so we're just going to swap computers.
Okay, we know she's here. Jane.
Yes, I'm here, Councillor.
Thank you. And Katie Lane.
Yes, I'm Katie Lane from Environmental Protection.
Thank you. Charles. Charles Hungwe, is he here?
Charles Hungwe is here. I think he's just talking to Mr. Cottrell.
Thank you. And Emily?
Emily's not with us today.
Okay. And I also have Ivan Goldsmith down.
He's the technical advisor. He's making sure our YouTube stream is fine, but he won't be joining us for the actual meeting itself.
Yeah, maybe log it out and log back in again. It might work then.
Okay. Penny Button.
Yeah, I'm here. Safe neighbourhoods.
Thank you, Penny. Nick. We know Nick's here. Charlotte. And we have representatives from the police.
Paul Diamond here, Kent Police Licensing Coordinator.
Thank you. And environmental health. Do we have a representative from environmental health?
Katie Lane, Environmental Protection.
Thank you, Katie. And our Paul Glixman. Is Paul here?
Mr. Glixman, could you unmute your microphone?
Yeah, I'm here now.
Thank you. And Michael King.
Yes, good morning, Michael King, Kernia Licensing Consultants.
Thank you. And Sarah Clover.
Good morning, Sarah Clover here. I'm the barrister who will be making the representation on behalf of Mr. Glixman. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's everyone now until the members of the public making representations. Do we have a Mr. Cottrell?
Not at present, Chairman. We're still trying to get him in.
Okay.
We'll come back to Mr. Cottrell shortly.
Thank you, Nick. Miss Fitzgerald. Is Miss Fitzgerald here? If she is, could you unmute your mic?
Hi. Good morning. I'm here.
Thank you. And I have Mr. Hasted. Mr. Hasted.
I'm in attendance.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Hasted. And have a Mr. Tapey.
I don't believe he's present, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And I have a Miss Yule.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Okay, have I missed anybody? No. Okay, we'll move on. If you have technical difficulties during the meeting, then please contact the Democratic Services officer on call who will attempt to assist you. They will put their phone number in the chat function on the right-hand side. I would ask participants, when you are not speaking, please mute your microphone. This minimises background noise and will help everyone in listening to the proceedings. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. To gain my permission to speak, please very briefly indicate on the chat to the right side of the screen, and I will then make a note and go back to you once the person speaking has finished. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls while the meeting is in progress. Do not turn off your phones in case you need to be contacted in the event of technical difficulties. Please also refrain from checking emails or conducting other business, and ensure that you are in a quiet room free from distractions for the duration of this meeting. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for the private deliberation part of this meeting. In this instance, a separate private hangout meeting will take place for that item only, and the public meeting will resume in its previous digital location 30 minutes later, unless there is a reason to suggest an earlier or later time. No unauthorised recording of the confidential item of business is permitted to take place. Moving on to agenda item 2, apologies for absence. Are there any other apologies for absence? No. Okay, moving on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. We can move to agenda item 4, application for premises licence, the St Mildred's Bay. I now call upon Gavin Happ, our interim senior litigation lawyer, to explain to the parties the procedure that we will be taking during the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Firstly, the subcommittee will receive a short factual summary of the application from Alison Brock of the Licensing Authority. And then the subcommittee will consider the evidence in the following order. First, the case on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Paul Glicksman, who is represented by Ms. Clover. The case on behalf of the applicant or licensee, including the calling of any witnesses. And then we'll follow the questioning of the applicant his witnesses by responsible authorities and interested parties. And these are the Environmental Health Officer, the police, the members of the public making representations. So that's Mr. Roger Cottrell, Ms. Elise Fitzgerald, Mr. Dave Haystead, Mr. Luke Tapey, and Miss Alison Young. And then there will be questioning of the applicant and his witnesses by members of the subcommittee. And then we'll follow the case on behalf of the responsible authority making a representation. So we will be hearing first from the Environmental Health Officer, and then after that the police. But the procedure will be repeated for each responsible authority. Then will come questioning of the responsible authority by the applicant, and then the interested parties, and then councillors. And as I've said, that procedure will be repeated also for the police station. So each interested party can make their representations, so they will be then available to be questioned by by other people making representations, and the applicant and the responsible authorities. And then finally they'll be subject to questions by the members if there are any. And again, this procedure will be repeated for each interested party who does make a representation. And then we'll come to summing up in the following order. So each responsible authority, so that'll be the Environmental Health Officer and the police, and then each interested party making a representation. And then finally, the applicant will make their closing submissions to the subcommittee. The subcommittee will then retire and consider the matter in private, as already been mentioned. And I will, as the subcommittee's legal advisor, read a summary of the subcommittee's decision. And the written determination will be circulated to all parties within 5 working days of the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. I would like to stress the importance of following this hearing procedure, and that there will be an opportunity for all parties to make a final presentation after questioning. Therefore, I would advise all those to please follow the procedure and to respect those speaking by not interrupting or speaking over others. If people do interrupt or speak over others, I, as chairman, will ask them to refrain from doing so. If they continue to do so after my warning, then that individual could face being asked to leave the meeting. I now ask, could the licensing officer please present the report?
Morning, everyone. The hearing has been called to consider an application to vary the premises licence in respect of the St Mildred's Bay, St Mildred's Gardens, Westgate-on-Sea, in light of representations received. The variation is a request to remove 2 current licence conditions, which can be seen in part 1.1 of the report. The applicants for the premises licence are required, as part of the application, to display a public notice and advertise in a local paper. These requirements appear to have been complied with. 20 representations were received from the public, 1 from the RNLI, and 2 were rejected. The Environmental Health Department and the police have also submitted representations. 1 representation was received in support of the application. The police have been in discussions with the applicant and have agreed 2 new conditions should the current 2 be removed. These can be found in 2.3 of the report. The Licensing Subcommittee will be aware that it must carry out its functions under 2003 Licensing Act to take steps which are appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. The licensing objectives are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. In carrying out its licensing functions, the Licensing Subcommittee must also have regard to its statement of the licensing policy and guidance issued under the Act. The options for the subcommittee are listed at the end of the report in section 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Now we come to the applicant's case. Would the applicant and agent and representative please present their application?
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm going to be presenting the application on behalf of Mr. Glixman. It's Mr. Glixman's licence, and Mr. Michael Keng, who's also in this meeting, is the licensing consultant, the licensing agent. If I can make the application first and set out all the details about it and commend it to you. I'm then going to ask Mr. Glixman, with your permission, Chair, just to say a few words at the end, because ultimately it's his licence. And you might like to hear, you and your colleagues might like to hear some words just from him personally. But if I set out the technicalities, as it were, this is an application to vary 2 conditions, and that's quite important because that focuses this hearing on those 2 conditions in particular. And I think there might have been a little bit of misunderstanding within some of the representations as to the scope of what this hearing might do, in terms, for example, of limiting hours or something of that sort. But it really is these 2 conditions that we're focusing on. You have some written material in the pack, in the panel's pack, on behalf of the applicant. There's some written material in there that you'd be invited to read. And also there's a short statement, a written statement from Mr. Glixman himself, that was submitted in advance that everybody has hopefully had the chance to read. And I would also ask the committee to take a look at that before reaching their decision. And I won't read it out, I'm just going to pick out some items from it. These 2 conditions, really in substance, it's just the one condition, and it's the issue about having to have a table meal, and that's the wording in the condition that's used, with alcohol. The second part of the condition that goes with it is called an implied condition, that there will also be non-alcoholic beverages available. Now, it's a matter for the committee, of course, but I would suggest that that's not really the controversial part of any of this hearing. It's really about, should alcohol be tied to a table meal? Now, this is a slightly old-fashioned condition. It's not commonly seen on licenses up and down the country anymore. It was the type of condition that was quite common under the 1964 licensing regime, when licensing was dealt with by the magistrates. As you will know, since 2005, we've been under the Licensing Act 2003 regime, and that's how this hearing has been conducted. And very often these sorts of conditions will have been modernised and updated in that round of change in 2005. And the St Mildred's Bay has had a licence since 2005. This isn't an up-to-date application, as it were. The premises have had a licence for a long time. Now, actually, this licensing authority and a licensing committee has seen this license before fairly recently. There was an application to vary the license in January of this year. Mr. Glixman only took the St Mildred's Bay on in late last year, late 2019, as an investment. You may know him as a local businessman. He has other premises in the town. He's got Paul's Bistro, which is quite useful, certainly useful from the responsible authorities' point of view, because they have a chance to observe and test him as a responsible businessman within the community. And I'll say a few words about the other premises in just a moment. But Mr. Glixman took on the St Mildred's Bay fairly late last year, before we were confronted with this coronavirus pandemic and all of the terrible consequences that have come with that. And the purpose for taking on what was previously a cafe, maybe people won't be offended if I call it slightly tired. It needed some TLC. It came on the market. Mr. Glixman took it on. And his ambition for it at that time was to turn it into a high-class restaurant. The application came in January, still before this COVID-19 pandemic hit, to extend the premises, to extend the area that the license applied to extend the hours, to extend the takeaway. That application came up in March, still just before the lockdown hit, and it was granted. And that's quite important to note, because that's the context of this application. And what really should have happened in that hearing in March is that these two conditions should have been considered at the same time. And that's not to point the finger at anybody. Mr. Keng did not put in the application in January. It was a different agent. It was considered in March. It couldn't be added on in March. So we've effectively split that application from March and now into these two parts. But these conditions go together with the takeaway ability of these premises to trade. And in actual fact, that was extended, as I say, in March. Now, for the specific part of this condition that's under consideration, that alcohol can only be taken with a meal, a table meal, I'm going to ask the committee to consider now, in the context of what this license is, what that actually means. Having been granted a takeaway facility for these premises, how would a table meal be described? At the moment, of course, it's not possible for anybody to have what might traditionally be described as a table meal, to go into the premises and sit down with a knife and fork. That simply isn't possible for any licensed premises at this time because of the pandemic situation that we're facing. What the premises are allowed to do, what most licensed premises up and down the country are now allowed to do with the government's approval, is to provide takeaway. And that's really for survival purposes, as you will understand. Businesses are under enormous pressure. Hospitality businesses in particular are under enormous pressure. And it's a very sad fact that a large percentage of our hospitality businesses will not survive this pandemic. The government has obviously appreciated that harsh fact and is doing everything that it can to protect and preserve businesses, because we need them to reignite the economy once we are able to come out of this lockdown and this situation. Takeaway provision for licensed premises was one of the things that the government stepped in to allow in terms of planning permission, to say, well, for this period of time, you don't need special planning permission to do that thing. So what Mr. Glixman is allowed to do even now, from a planning and a licensing point of view, is to provide a takeaway facility from these premises. And he is allowed to provide, let's say, a hot dog or a hamburger or something like that with alcohol that people take away, but he would not be permitted to provide the alcohol on its own. Now, in that context, the conditions make very little sense. And in terms of varying this condition, what I really want to commend to, the message I really want to emphasize this morning is that it's not the condition or the wording of the condition that preserves the behavior of customers. It's the management. You may well appreciate that tying alcohol with food is no particular guarantee in and of itself of how people behave. You may well have come across or even been at parties where people are eating food, food is available, and yet people are not on their best behavior, having had a drink or whatever it is. It's not about forcing people to eat while they're drinking. It's a question of management. It's a question of the class and the caliber of the premises. People tend to behave themselves well if the premises are of a classy nature, and that's the expectation placed upon them, and staff are well trained and the management are on top of their game, and so forth. And that brings me back to Mr. Glixman's other premises within the town, Paul's Bistro, because there you have a working example of the kind of manager, the kind of operator that Mr. Glixman is. He has another set of premises that you can judge him by, that the police and environmental health can judge him by. That does not have this condition. It doesn't tie alcohol and food. There are no difficulties. It's not a question that Mr. Glixman has ever had any problems, ever had any complaints. The police have not had cause to deal with incidents at the premises or anything of that sort. That's not the nature of the concern. So really looking at this condition for this license, it's about fear of what might happen if this condition is relaxed. But the purpose of relaxing the condition, of course, in the immediate term, is this ability to survive. And that's very, very important, that the number of premises that will not survive the COVID-19 situation is quite terrifying. And that's very important from a local economy point of view. And you have in your pack some of your corporate priorities, and I want to touch on those at the end because they tie into this. So takeaway in this immediate term is a very important part of this application. Mr. Glixman has his hands tied, and there may be ramifications over the next few months that mean that business is struggling entirely. So in terms of some of the concerns and the fears that have been expressed by residents, those do not have immediate application. Nobody is drinking or eating inside the premises. That will be unlikely to be happening on any view until towards the end of the year, possibly even into 2021. So I'm asking the committee to consider this application at this point in time in respect of the conditions that currently pertain. And I'll say this now, and I'll also say it at the end. It must never be forgotten that the licensing regime works on a light touch basis because there is the facility for a review. And the police understand this, the responsible authorities, licensing authority, environmental health understand this. It's never a question of the licensing getting out of control, because if there are any particular issues, any particular concerns arising from any element of the operation of the premises, it is always possible for any of the responsible authorities, or indeed the residents themselves, to come back with a review application and say, actually, that part isn't working. So that's something to consider. But in the future, the change in this condition is also very important because of Mr. Glixman's vision and aspirations for these premises, which are very important. The purpose of taking on the premises, the purpose of investing in the first place, was to transform them, to really restore premises in a prime location that could do so much for tourism, could do so much for the local economy. He has a planning application that's been granted that would see significant glass frontage, a very beautiful glass balustrade, really transforming the premises into somewhere attractive and appealing for people to sit, look out across the bay, look out across the sea, and to draw people to that facility in a controlled and a welcoming fashion. And that's a good thing. Very similar to the operation of the bistro, which is only about half a mile away. So there's something on the table. There was at the time of the purchase of the premises, like £200,000 worth of investment that was proposed for these premises. The planning application has been made and has been granted, and that's also very important because for some of the representations that the members of the public, that residents are making, those will also have been considered at the time of the grant of the planning application. Now, I understand, of course, as a professional practitioner, that licensing and planning are different. However, there comes a point where they cross over, and when you make a planning application, officers will still be looking at issues such as noise, disturbance, antisocial behaviour. Are these the right premises in the right place? Should they benefit from the planning application that has been made? All of these things will be considered in terms of the planning application, so that there are important crossovers there. In terms of the proposal for the economy, a number of the residents have said this is a quiet area. This is an area for residents and particularly for retirees. It's very important to balance local economies. As the committee will know, a seaside town such as Westgate will need a balance of their demographic. It can't just be a place for people to come and live quietly and retire and so forth. There is a need for local business. There is a need for local economy. There is a need for tourism. There's a need for jobs and job opportunities. There's a need for opportunities for young people. And all of these things have to be considered at the same time. Mr. Glixman, as I hope you've picked up from his statement, is a well-established and respected businessman. He has been in Westgate-on-Sea for some 39 years, and he's been in the hospitality industry for something like 18 years. So he is a huge credit to the local community and the local economy, and he deserves that support, and he has that support. He has that support from local councillors, and he has that support from the town council. He is in and of himself a significant contributor to the local economy. The St Mildred's Bay currently employs something like 14 employees. That will increase at such a time that business picks up, that business is improved after this lockdown situation. He employs something similar at the Paul's Bistro. These are significant numbers in terms of local employment. He also has a commendable reputation as a local businessman. He's involved in local charity work. He sits with the Westgate Light Committee, which you will no doubt know, and is involved in Westgate Day. I'm getting messages coming through that, in fact, the planning has not been granted yet. So I retract that comment and I apologise for it. That's my misunderstanding. I thought that it had. In any event, I flip that comment then around to say that they are similar considerations that will be taken into account in planning. So far as the licence is concerned, essentially, the ability for these premises to trade with the aspects that I've highlighted, that the plan that will be used was considered in March. So it's effectively the other way around then, that licensing have already approved the operation of these premises with the vision that Mr. Glixman has. If that has yet to go through planning, then conversely, the committee has the reassurance that, as I've said, exactly the same considerations must be taken into account. Residential amenity, noise, are these the right premises in the right place? So to a certain extent, then the committee can relax and say those are considerations for the other committee. I turn specifically to the representations that have been made, the residents' representations that have been made. I understand it's a similar number, around about 20 objections that were made in March, and it seems that a number of the things that have been raised in the representations were similar sorts of points that were made and not accepted by the committee in March. There's quite a lot, for example, about these hours are inappropriate. Well, hours, as you will appreciate, are a settled matter at this point. That's not what this committee is being asked to look at. But the reason behind the representations, the core fear behind the representations, is that these premises, with the single change of this condition, will turn into a pub or a nightclub or a late night destination. And that's simply not the case. The premises will remain exactly in accordance with Mr. Glicksman's vision, exactly in accordance with the changed application for the licence that came in and was considered in March, exactly in accordance with the planning application. This is a restaurant-based proposal. It's a restaurant-based operation of a high-class calibre. So the food that will be on offer is significantly superior to what was being offered previously, and the reputation of the premises already has been noted to be significantly improved. It's not a pub. It's not intended to be a pub, and removing that condition on its own, as I've said, would not make it into one. A number of the concerns that residents are raising are not logically connected to this change in conditions. So some of the points that have been made, and let me say at the outset that, of course, residents' concerns are always to be taken very seriously. These are the people who live and work in the area. This is their area as well. I completely understand and respect that. And nothing I'm saying is intended to dismiss these concerns in any way. But what I hope I can do is to demonstrate that these concerns will not manifest themselves in real life. And there are a number of reasons for that. The nature of what residents are concerned about in terms of increase in traffic, for example, or increase in noise at dispersal, or increase in antisocial behaviour. There's no particular reason to believe that the amendment of this condition would have any of those consequences flowing from it. People will attend the premises at this point in time in a different way, of course, because we're in a lockdown situation, but even rolling forward to a time where people can attend the premises in the way that's intended, there's no reason to believe that they will attend the premises in a different way because they can or cannot have food or cannot have alcohol with their food. The attendance, the capacity of the premises will be the same. The people who are likely to want to attend will be the same. The simple change in this condition is not the element that would give rise to the issues that the residents are concerned about. If anything, these are the sorts of concerns and considerations that will have been taken into account by the last committee when they approved an extension of the premises and they approved an extension in the hours. That's the point at which one might have expected any well-founded concerns about a change in the visiting pattern to have been taken into account, and it's clearly been concluded that that would not occur. This additional change won't change that. So when residents talk about there might be later deliveries or more deliveries to the premises, or there might be more traffic and so on, that's not a conclusion that would flow from this particular change. And as I've indicated, the responsibility of people, consumers around alcohol, tends to depend upon the type of place they're going to and the behaviour that's expected of them while they're there. And for Mr. Glicksman, that's really not going to be an issue. Now, there are additional concerns about how people are likely to behave in the open space, how they're going to behave on the beach. Are they going to be unruly on the beach having obtained alcohol? And there's a particular issue with litter. When I come to the police representation, you'll of course see that was the key concern of the police as to how people would behave in the public realm and any danger around glass. Well, the glass issue has been taken care of comprehensively with a condition that there will not be takeaway glass. Mr. Glicksman doesn't have a problem with that. All takeaway alcohol can be provided in receptacles that will not cause danger to people. They won't be made of glass. Even a bottle, a wine bottle, something of that sort can be supplied in plastic. So there's no question of glass at all. And the containers can, in certain circumstances, also be biodegradable. In terms of people going onto the beach with alcohol and misbehaving, well, of course, it's a fact of life that if people are prepared to do that kind of thing, if they want to do that kind of thing, they can obtain alcohol from a local convenience store or a supermarket, if that is their intent. And it is actually preferable for people to buy alcohol if that is what they want to do, to sit on the beach, to have a bottle of beer with their sandwich or whatever else it is. It is better that they go and procure it from a local business with responsible staff who can judge whether that sale ought to be made, who can judge whether that person has already had too much alcohol and they're not going to get any more. So it's not a question of refusing the condition for that reason. We want people primarily to obtain their alcohol from responsible premises that can apply the checks and the controls, underage checks, checking people are sober, and so forth. It is a very, very important point in this case that the responsible authorities, by and large, are satisfied with this application. There was a very careful consideration with the police. You have, I think, copies of the exchange of correspondence with the police, and obviously Officer Dimmock will comment in due course. But an agreement was reached with the police that the premises would be well run as long as there was no glass, as I've indicated, and that takeaways terminated at 10 o'clock, 2200 hours. Now that's more than an opinion, because that is the conclusion of a responsible authority, and you will know from the Section 182 guidance, and you will know from other sources, that the advice of the police, the professional opinion of the police about issues of antisocial behaviour, crime and disorder are to be taken particularly seriously. They are to be given significant weight. And unless there's specific evidence that the conclusion of the police is wrong for some reason, then that is a position that the committee are invited to take very seriously. And similarly, the licensing authority, as a responsible authority, is capable of putting in an objection if they see any issues, which they might if they thought this was an irresponsible licensee, or that he ran other premises irresponsibly or anything of that sort, and you don't have that representation from the licensing authority, or indeed from trading standards, or from any other quarter other than environmental health, and I will come on to that in just a moment. So it's very important, as I said, to consider the totality of this situation. We do have case law that indicates that a licensing decision like this is really a 360-degree exercise, and you are quite entitled, perfectly entitled, to take into account the impact and the input on the local economy. I mentioned your corporate responsibilities, which you have set out at the front of your report, and for some of those, looking at the local job situation, looking at the resilience of the economy, are particular priorities that the council has said that it will take into account. And so I do invite the council to do that very thing. The representation on your page 99 from Coastal Development and the Tourism Team, which I think includes comments from the RNLI on this occasion, raised some concerns which I'd invite you to conclude have in fact all been met. And particularly with the approval of the police in terms of any glass on the beach or any antisocial behaviour on the beach. At page 103, the Town Council's representation has been categorised as supportive, and they do say that they support Mr. Glixman, and Mr. Glixman has certainly experienced that support from the Town Council, but they have also raised the issue of hours, which I have indicated at the beginning of this representation. It is not actually something that's currently before this committee. So I'll deal with the representation from Environmental Health. Now, it appears that Environmental Health have effectively repeated the objection that they placed before the committee on the last occasion. So there's an element of confusion there, because the phrase in this current objection about in line with their last objection, actually that's apples and pears. We are dealing with something very different. We are dealing specifically with this condition, and Environmental Health have put forward an objection on the basis of these are the wrong premises in the wrong place. Well, that's not a consideration for this committee today. That goes too far, if I may respectfully say so. Those are perhaps some of the considerations that Environmental Health could raise with the planning department, the planning committee, if that application is still going through, as it clearly is. But in terms of location not suitable for a late drinking establishment, well, the premises are there and the hours are set. So that isn't, in fact, something that Environmental Health can present to this committee today. So I'm not entirely clear, and no doubt they will explain what the particular concerns are about the condition, which is what we are here for. I am going to pause there for a moment, and I wonder if I can just ask through you, Chair, if Mr. Glixman would add a few words. As I say, he has put in his statement, and he has described not only his background in the town, but also his aspirations for these premises. But if I could just ask him at this moment just to say a few more words about that to you.
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. As you're probably aware, I have run Paul's Bar and Bistro for the last 18 months. Done it very successfully. I had no issues whatsoever with anything whatsoever. I keep a really tight ship. I don't allow any trouble whatsoever. And I'm going to do exactly the same at St Mildred's. We don't have, it's mainly the older clientele that we get there. We don't get the young kids that want the cheap drink. That's not what we want to do. That's not where we're coming from. You know, we want to do with nicer clientele that sort of want to come in and have an enjoyable evening. We don't want a nightclub there. I don't want a bar with lots of unruly people. We're not doing anything like that. All we want to do is have a really lovely premises that's going to serve Westgate and be a credit to Westgate. Nothing else really, you know. I do really run a tight ship, you know. I don't have any trouble whatsoever at Paul's. If the first sign of trouble, they barge. I don't allow anything like that to happen, and I'll do exactly the same. We have great staff who are really mindful of this. You know, everybody gets checked on age if they do come in, the younger ones. And we're really strict, you know. We don't want, you know, the people that come in, like we have lots of females that come in and feel safe to come in because of the way that we run our business. And we're going to do exactly the same at St Mildred's. So you've got absolutely, there's no reason to be concerned about how the premises will be run. I will run it exactly the same. That's it, really.
Thank you, Mr. Glixman.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to pause there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That is the application, and I know there'll be an opportunity to sum up in due course. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Does the licensing team have any questions for the applicant?
No, we don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Do Environmental Health have any questions for the applicant? You will also have an opportunity to present your case, but if you have any questions, please state them now.
Yes, I do. I'm Katie Lane from Environmental Protection. The question that I had really was in relation to Paul's Bar, Paul's Bistro, as it's been referred to. Now, I understand that this St Mildred's Bay is going to be run in the same way as Paul's. Is that correct?
I'm going to Glixman to pick up on a specific point like that, if that's okay.
Well, in the fact that we're going to do, obviously, a different quality of food, we will, yeah, in a pretty similar way. I don't. It's not going to be a nightclub, and we don't run Paul's as a nightclub. We will have, you know, through a TENS license, we will do some events, but obviously there would be pre-warned to the council and to the local residents. Like, you know, if we have like a singer on a Saturday evening, it'll be inside the singer. You know, we're not going to have anything external. We've got that agreement that no, the doors will be closed at 9 p.m. The music wouldn't go on later than sort of, if we have a singer, it's sort of 10 o'clock that they finish anyway. Yeah, we don't. I don't want to have a nightclub there. That's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah. All I would sort of want to say on the fact of it being run in the same way as Paul's is that we are aware that, as you've rightly said, sometimes there's themed evenings, functions, live music, parties, and obviously that will bring complaints, which we have received about pools in the past, not in relation to young patrons or rowdy behaviour, as in, you stopping people from coming in. However, we have had complaints in relation to patron noise, which can be caused by any person, young, sophisticated, and also about the loud music, external loud music, live bands. And obviously, this is something that concerns me that could be happening at St Mildred's Bay.
Well, no, St Mildred's Bay is quite a lot larger, where it would be, I would be able to have the bands internally, unless it was an actual event through a TENS licence. So I'm not going to have loads of music, loads of bands outside, because it is probably double the size of pools, which means that I would be able to contain it within inside the building. Okay. And that's what I'm looking to do.
Sure. All I would like to say is obviously the area of St Mildred's Bay is completely different to the High Street in Westgate. So although the building would be larger, I would have concerns that there is no other noise source, particularly in the area. There's no trains, traffic, other establishments. So I would be concerned about noise that's being caused. As you know, I have those concerns.
There is obviously next door is Millie's, and they do have live events as well, and they've seemed to have worked okay. I know that they have DJs, and I know that they have live singers, and we're going to be no different to them. It will be controlled in a sort of a really helpful way that, we don't want to upset the locals. We really want to work with them.
Yeah, sure. Can I ask as well how that will be controlled? Because in the application under the licensing objective for the prevention of public nuisance, it said that no steps were identified that were not already covered under these or other legislation. So I just wondered if you are changing it from a restaurant to a drinking establishment, how, why no new steps would be necessary?
I don't know if it's something that I should answer or Sarah should answer. I'm not sure I'm following the question, in all honesty.
Chair, may I pick up on this question, because I do have some concerns, and I've dropped one of them in the chat room. This is not about the application. In terms of noise and events, these are matters that will have been taken into consideration on the last occasion when the extension of hours was being considered for the licence overall. What the committee is considering exclusively today. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, the screens are frozen. I just wondered if everybody was still hearing me. What we're considering today is exclusively whether alcohol must be served with a table meal. That is the only consideration in front of this committee. So unfortunately, Ms Lane's questions are not something that this committee can rule upon. And I make a formal legal submission on that under Regulation 18 of the Licensing Hearings Regulations 2005. So it's not a light matter. In terms of noise events and what Mr Glixman can or cannot do, that's settled, and comparisons with Paul's Bar are therefore inappropriate. And I also take formal exception to any reference to complaints that have been made that are not in the environmental health representation. Evidence has not been given. It is not permissible to add things to a representation in the middle of a hearing. And I also invoke Regulation 18 on that as well.
Thank you. Is there any further representation from environmental health? Katie Lane seems to have left the meeting. Okay, let's move on. Do the police have any questions for the applicants?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Penny, what?
Sorry, could I just come in to say that everything needs to be through the meeting and not in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So, my question, do the police have any questions for the applicant?
No, Mr Chairman, I do not have any questions at this moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do the members of the public making representations have any questions for the applicant? I will come to each objector in turn by name. Please ask only relevant questions. If you do not have any questions, please say no questions. I would remind members of the public making representations, this is not the point in the meeting to state your case or opinions. This will come later. please stick at the moment to asking questions. Mr. Roger Cotterill, do you have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Cotterill?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Can I ask Mr. Dixon, you said a minute ago that he would like to do the same with the same amount of parking as millers. What he felt in exactly the same was
Sorry, Mr. Cotterill. You're very, very faint. You could,
you hearing me better now?
Slightly, if you could speak up a little bit louder, please.
You hear me now?
Slightly better, yes. Yeah.
Mr. Dixon said a minute ago that he would like to the same thing as that millers. What he felt in exactly the same was millers closes at 2 o'clock. This establishment is licensed would stay up until 1:30, which is a very big difference. So it was good to compare with these same project close at 2 o'clock.
I couldn't quite hear the whole question, Mr. Cotterill, but I gather this was concerning the hours of the premises. Would that be correct?
It's just replying to a statement Mr. Dixon made a minute ago, where he said that millers can have entertainment. He would like the same sort of facility. What he found to say was that millers closes at 10 o'clock at night, not at 1:15 a.m.
Yeah, I think this is a question about hours, which we not really relevant to this actual meeting.
No, it's just replying to what Mr. Jackson stated.
Okay. Would Mr. Glixman or Ms. Clover like to respond to that?
I'm very sorry, Chair. I didn't get a single word of that.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Cotterill. It was such a bad connection. I'll have to move on. Miss Elise Fitzgerald, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dave Hasted, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasted. Is Mr. Tapey here? No, I don't think so. Moving on. Miss Alison Yule, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's all the members of the public there. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chair, just quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Huxley.
Yes, Councillor Huxley. Just say to Sarah Clover, you sort of explained about, can you just explain again a bit more clearly, why did the applicant not bring this variation that we're talking about now with when you brought the original variation in March? That was to increase the opening hours. Seems a bit strange that you didn't put the two together. Some of the residents might think that was suspicious or something. Can you explain a bit more fully? Thank you.
Yes, I can, and it is a very good question, and there's nothing suspicious about it. Unfortunately, Mr. Glixman hasn't been well served by that situation. He had an agent who devised the application for him back in January. It wasn't something that Mr. Keng had anything to do with, and it wasn't something that I had anything to do with. But the agent at that time simply didn't join up the dots, didn't make the connection that if you're going to have takeaway, and you're going to extend takeaway and extend hours, then you need to go through these conditions as well. And obviously this condition represents an ambiguity and a roadblock to the application that was made in March. It simply wasn't picked up on, and it should have been. But it becomes an anomaly now, even to the extent, as I've said, it's not clear what it means. If you can have takeaways, but you must only have alcohol with a table meal, what is a table meal? This is the point that I made earlier. It actually doesn't make any sense. So we have a condition on the license now that is meaningless and unenforceable, that's key, that would make it an unlawful condition. So you're absolutely right. It should have been dealt with at the last occasion. It just wasn't. And that was really the fault of the application in January. You can't make changes like that when it actually comes to the committee in March. That's changing the application too much and trying to extend it too much. So it just couldn't be dealt with at that stage. And that's why a further application has had to be made like this.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask the licensing members of staff what the sort of their different definition of what a table meal and alcohol mean, or is that not part of this committee? Can you sort of give a definition of what the legislation actually means? Thank you.
Can't quite hear you at the moment, Penny.
Sorry, Chair, something wrong with Penny, the volume. Are you happy for us to answer that question? Because obviously the questions at the moment should be of the applicant.
Okay. Okay, so is there any more questions from the committee? Can I ask Mr. Glixman, when were the two conditions originally applied?
The two conditions? When were they applied for?
When were they actually issued? When were they put on the premises, these two conditions?
Well, I think that they was already in place. When I purchased the premises, the conditions were there. And when we push in the application to vary the times, the guy who was representing me at the beginning, obviously it wasn't really the right person for the job. And I soon realised that. That's when I moved and asked Michael to represent me at the last case. And it was then that we realised that there was still food on the licence that shouldn't have been there. That's when obviously we've now had to, obviously at a great expense, which I would rather have dealt with it all in the March hearing. You know, for me, it would have been much better to get it all done. You know, there was no reason for us to do this. There shouldn't have been, really, other than it was an error from the guy who was representing me from the January application. Was a huge error, and that was the reason why we're now where we are today.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I wonder if I can assist in relation to when the conditions will have gone on the licence. The licence was granted in 2005, which will have been a conversion, presumably over from a previous licence under the 1964 regime. These look to me like carryover conditions. It looks like an attempt just to replicate what the licence used to be into a new licence when the Act came in. That's what my eye is telling me. I don't know, your licensing officers will probably know whether there was any change again to that licence from 2005 until Mr. Glixman took it on and made his application in January. I suspect not. But it's the language of the old 1964 Act, this one, table meals.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, there's no more questions from the committee. I'd like to ask the Environmental Health Officer, if she's still here, whether she would like to present their case.
Yes, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I pressed the wrong button. Apologies.
Okay, welcome back.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. So good morning, everyone. As you know, my name is Katie Lane. I'm an Environmental Protection Officer. I've reviewed the application to remove the two conditions of the licence, and I'm objecting this on the grounds of the prevention of public nuisance. It is important when considering the promotion of this licensing objective that licensing and responsible authorities focus on the effect of the licensable activities at the specific premises on persons living and working in the area around the premises, which may be disproportionate and unreasonable. My concerns are around noise nuisance. The premises, as we know, has since the grant of the licence in 2005 has been generally used as a daytime beach cafe used between 9 and 5, and it's never actually been used to the full extent of the licence that was granted at this time. So the conditions imposed on the licence allow the premises to operate as a restaurant. If these conditions are removed, it will become more of a drinking establishment. And with the recent change to the operation chimes, the drinking will go on into the early hours of the morning. I also note that there has been a planning application submitted, as we've discussed, which requests a change of use from an A3 to a joint A3/A4. And I'd just like to clarify that an A3 use is for restaurants and cafes, whereas an A4 use includes public houses, wine bars, and other drinking establishments. So this shows that the move is being made to a drinking establishment, as the conditions imposed restricts the use to be out of a restaurant. Recently, as Sarah has explained, we've had a hearing in March. On that hearing, a condition was added to the licence which required all windows and doors to be closed after 9. This was to reduce possible noise emanating from inside the premises. However, I've always had concerns about the external courtyard, as noise from this area would be very difficult to control. To section 1 of the revised guidance, and more specifically section 2.1 of which states that conditions relating to noise nuisance will usually concern steps appropriate to control the level of noise emanating from the premises. This may be achieved by a simple measure such as closing the windows and doors, which obviously they already have, or not permitting use of garden areas at this time. And I would reiterate that this is where I'm really concerned about the noise nuisance that could be caused. So in light of the guidance, I have liaised with Michael, and I did offer a condition to control this area, which would be that the service and consumption of alcohol in the courtyard is restricted to 9 p.m. daily. So that is in line with the windows and doors, everybody being closed. This was not agreed. The condition wasn't agreed. So just to reiterate, I have grave concerns about the noise pollution being caused in the area, and my objections in this representation are not only to protect the residents in the area, but also the applicant, who would be open to noise nuisance, could be open to noise nuisance complaints once fully operational. You'll also note the level of objections received, that concerns are widespread, and I would reiterate that the nearest residential properties are only 10 metres away from the premises. I feel that removing the conditions will change the logistics of the premises. The condition, I feel, helps prevent public nuisance. This ends my representation.
Thank you, Ms. Lane. Does the applicant or agent have any questions for the Environmental Health Officer?
Just one through you, Chair, if I may. Ms. Lane, this is essentially the same objection that Environmental Health presented to the March committee.
I still have the concerns about noise pollution. Yes, those concerns haven't gone away. And I feel that taking those conditions off are just going to escalate the matter even further.
Well, I'll deal with that part in submissions, but that was my question. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Do the members of the public making representations have any questions for the Environmental Health Officer? I'll come to each objector in turn by name. Please ask only relevant questions. If you do not have any questions, please say no questions. I'd remind members of the public making representations, this is not the point in the meeting to state your case or opinions. This will come later. Please stick to just asking questions. Mr. Roger Cotterill, do you have any questions for the Environmental Health Officer? Thank you. Miss Elise Fitzgerald, do you have any questions?
Not at this point, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Hasted.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, David. Mr. Tapey is not here. Okay. And Miss Alison Ewell, have you any questions for the Environmental Health Officer?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Do members of the committee have any questions for the Environmental Health Officer?
No, I don't have any, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the police like to present their case now, please?
Yes, sir. To members of the committee and the panel, I would like to submit the police case. From the documentation, you should have received the police evidence or their form of representation towards this question. The premises had been used since 2005 under the new Licensing Act 2003 as predominantly a cafe cum restaurant. I agree from the authorities, the environmental health, that this has not been used to its full capacity. However, in 2020, in March, an application was received by the police to allow off sales on these premises. The police had no evidence and could not produce evidence, as anything would be hearsay at the time of the hearing. However, during the negotiation terms of this one, a lot of things have come to light. I accept from Mr. Glicksman's own reports and from Sarah Clover, this was purchased as an investment. The investment of these premises clearly states that something else was going to happen. The removal of conditions and allowing off sales was the start. However, that start was clear from local residents' point of view of causing concern. I, as the police licensing authority, can only talk on crime and disorder, prevention of crime and disorder. Therefore, from my report, you have seen that I suggested 2 conditions that could be put in place to alleviate the concerns of the police. That is, rubbish on the beach, potential for harm to local residents, causing crime disorder. I'd like to refer to the report evidence given by the applicants. I have fully understood and read the Hope and Glory Public House Limited versus City of Westminster. Licensing decisions often involve weighing a variety of competing considerations. The demand of the licensing establishments, the economic benefits of the proprietor, and the locality of drawing in visitors and stimulating the demand. This effect on local law and order. The impact must be considered of the lives of those who live and work in the vicinity, and so on. I won't go into the full thing. However, this case does not take away public human rights. Mr. Glicksman has invested in these premises greatly and has established a business. However, we are considering the premises license. The license at the present moment could, quite rightly, be turned from a cafe restaurant into a public house, or even, dare I say it, a late night venue, which has an impact on crime and disorder. I have therefore asked for these conditions to be added to the list, which Mr. King has agreed to. With a variation, I've asked for 1,900 hours and they've asked for 2,200 hours. The police are willing to accept the 2,200 hours to protect local residents. Hopefully, I would like really to give this moment to the local residents who live there. I, as the police licensing authority, have no evidence to say what could and what will happen. I can only work on facts and facts of evidence. Therefore, I would like to present that as the police representations to this application. Removing these conditions will have an effect on local communities. And removing these conditions will give the right to Mr. Glicksman to operate as a pub and or late night venue. So the conditions stand as I have submitted in my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does the applicant or agent or representative have any questions for the police?
No, I'll just make submissions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Do members of the public making representations have any questions for the police? I'll come to each objector in turn by name. Please ask only relevant questions. I'd remind members of the public making representations, this is not the point in the meeting to state your case. This will come later. Please stick to asking questions. Mr. Cottrell, do you have any questions for the police?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Cottrell.
You have to react, you have to be reactive.
Excuse me, Mr. Cottrell. Once again, the reception, the signal is so bad. I'm afraid we can't hear what you're saying. I'm sorry about that.
Chairman, may I make a suggestion, please?
Yes.
If you move on to the next person that's going to make a representation, if Mr. Cottrell writes his question in the chat function on the side of the screen, then I, as the officer, may read that out on his behalf. Would that be an acceptable solution to you, sir?
Yes, that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you, Nick. Is that okay, Mr. Cottrell?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, moving on, Miss Elise Fitzgerald, have you any questions for the police?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Hasted, any questions for the police?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
I was wondering why your initial request was for 10 o'clock as a limit, but you've actually agreed to, sorry, you requested 7 o'clock initially, but you agreed to 10 p.m.
Going through the chair, if I may respond to that.
Yes.
Please have negotiation. We are working both with the local residents, with the agent and the applicant to get the best we can. We are producing evidence. If we can't produce evidence, we have to negotiate. Compromise between 10 o'clock and 1900 hours. 10 o'clock was accepted as a reasonable end of night. The reason why I've asked for the hours, 1900 hours and 2200 hours, was I did not want to see, and I will pick up a point from Sarah Clover on this, I do not want to see people using the convenience of these establishments to obtain further stocks of alcohol to be taken onto the beach. It is more convenient to do that. It is inconvenient to walk up the road to purchase from an off-licence or another establishment further quantities of alcohol and bring them down to the beach. It is a point of a negotiation, and I believe I've accepted that. Thank you.
You happy with that, Mr. Hasted?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Miss Alison Yule, do you have any questions for the police?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do members of the committee have any questions for the police?
No, I don't have any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and just to confirm, these two new conditions would be no off sales from 10 in the morning till 10 in the evening, and non-glass. Would they be the two conditions, Mr. Dement?
The conditions are as stated. However, you, the committee, well, I'll go back a little bit. As the time for negotiation, the last day of representation took place, these negotiations were put in place. Therefore, local residents did not have the option of understanding what conditions had been accepted by the police. Therefore, I am bringing it to the committee for ratification. You, the committee, have the right to either amend, change or refuse those conditions at this moment in stage.
Thank you. This is the point of the meeting at which members of the pub, sorry, go on. Oh, sorry, yeah, Mr. Cottrell, yeah.
Just to confirm that Mr. Cottrell has confirmed that his question to the police has already been asked by Mr. Hasted, so he won't be asking a further question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. This is the point of the meeting at which the members of the public making representations will get to do so. I will ask each objector in turn to make their representation. Can members of the public making representations please refrain from repeating the points made by previous speakers? I will then allow questions from the applicant, relevant authorities and members of the committee once all members of the public making representations have done so. Miss Elise Fitzgerald, please can you make your representation? Or would you like to make a representation, Miss Fitzgerald?
Not this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hasted, would you like to make a representation?
Yes, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Although it's not a matter for the hearing, the agent referred at some length to the current planning application with request for a change to a bar. Removal of these two conditions under licensing will turn the premises from a restaurant to a public bar with a late night license, which will lead to an increased public nuisance from customers leaving the premises. I'd also add that whilst accepting that the current pandemic is an unusual situation, it is hoped it's only going to be a temporary measure, and I don't believe it should be considered to make a decision that's going to affect residents for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasted. Miss Alison Ewell, would you like to make a representation?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
I'd just like to say, really, the removal of this condition will have a huge impact on this area, and I feel, unfortunately, not for the better for all the reasons stated in various statements today. Whilst I note you say, Mr. Glixman, that you've invested heavily in this new venture, equally, we have all invested in buying our apartments, and there is now potential for the loss of value when a bar could be 20 foot away from these apartments. Simply put, would you buy an apartment now that was prime position with a sea view in a quiet area when suddenly you're going to have a pub in front of you? Or equally, where you currently live, how would you feel if you and your neighbours had a pub built 20 foot from your premises?
Thank you, Miss Ewell. Does the applicant or agent have any questions for any of the members of the public making representations?
No, thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Do environmental health have any questions for the members of the public making representations?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry to interject, Chairman. Obviously, Mr. Cottrell obviously was a person that was making representation. I appreciate the fact that Mr. Cottrell is having some issues with his microphone, but I think it would be fair to give him the opportunity to at least try. And I would ask Mr. Cottrell to speak up quite loudly, if that's possible, if you wish to make a representation.
Fine. Yeah, thanks.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You might need to shout a bit louder, Mr. Cottrell.
Someone can hear me, but I look at it. In Mr. Penn's manual, page 12, refers to the open drawing sort of residence building. What it says in there, that these cases are not always black and white. It continues that they involve an evaluation of what is to be regarded as reasonably acceptable in that particular location. Anybody reading the comments, the 20 objectors must come to the conclusion that this application is neither reasonable or acceptable in this particular location. Did anybody hear that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. Do Environmental Health have any questions for the members of the public making representations?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Do the police have any questions for the members of the public making representations?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members of the committee have any questions for members of the public? No,
No, Chair, thank you.
thank you.
No, thank you.
Would Environmental Health like to make their representation?
Yes, thank you. Okay. So whilst I appreciate the pandemic means that businesses need to adapt the way they operate, however, we, as one of the objectives explained, we are considering the long-term implications of the conditions being removed. It is not submitted to deal with the current situation on a temporary basis. The renewal of these conditions will change the way the business is operated. I appreciate that noisy and rowdy behaviour can be caused even when people have eaten. However, in general, Environmental Health receive less complaints about patron and music noise from restaurants than they do to SARS. The noise associated with this change will cause increased noise pollution. I would remind you of my suggested condition to restrict the service and consumption of alcohol to the outside area until 9 p.m. If the removal of these conditions is granted, I would urge the committee to consider the inclusion of this condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lane. Would the police like to make a final statement?
So we'll do that. The present premises licence was agreed by Thanet District Council at a hearing on the 3rd of March 2020. Removing these two conditions will have the effect of fully removing the cafe and restaurant option of these facilities, and therefore turn them into more of akin to a pub, or dare I say it, a late night venue, which would be more suitable for a town centre rather than a sleepy seaside cafe environment. Many of the local residents are elderly and therefore, under human rights, would lose their benefit to live in peace and quiet in their latter years. The police have requested a number of conditions to hopefully mitigate against these effect to local residents. However, the committee has the right to amend or increase those conditions if required. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would the interesting parties, namely the members of the public making representations, like to make their final comments? Mr. Roger Cottrell, would you like to make a final comment?
Please. Can you hear me?
We can just about hear you, Mr. Cottrell. Again, if you could speak up, please, that would be most kind.
These applications that we use return a sleepy seaside play, basically a night, noisy late night drinking area, traffic chaos, and to add to that, no extra parking being supplied at all, in an area that is notorious for parking issues. Characteristics would change from some elderly residents and family orientated, returning to some late night drinkers and revellers. The premises staying up until 1:15 in the morning, and licensing hours from 8 a.m. in the morning, which is 17, 18 hours a day, and the premises would be allowed to sell alcohol. Instead of a cafe, we would have a public house able to sell alcohol to anybody over 18, walking in off the street from the beach from 8 a.m. 7 days a week. This would result in lots of noise, lack of sleep for the local residents, public disorder, stress, I could go on, but I think the particular area I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. Mr. Elise Fitzgerald, would you like to make final comment?
Yes, thank you. St Mildred's Bay is very unique, as it is a bay that is very quiet, very family orientated, is frequented by locals. By changing the licence would massively affect this bay and our mental health and well-being. This is an area that we all love and the community is strong, and we don't need a late night establishment here. There are plenty of late night establishments. We welcome a lovely business on the seafront that, you know, serves the public within family hours. We are only a stone's throw away from this venue, and it would massively affect our mental health, our well-being, and general living. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Dave Hasted, have you got any final comment?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Thank you. And Miss Alison Newell, would you like to make a final comment?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay,
I'd like to summarise by saying I feel very strongly about having this condition removed because of the impact it will have on our lives, given we are in such close proximity to the building. Nowhere along the Thanet coastline is there a bar that is this close to residential properties with late operating hours, and the removal of this condition will just further those hours. I would like to ask the committee to please look into further reducing the off-sales licence to 1900 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the applicant and agent and representative like to sum up, please?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. This is a slightly strange hearing, as the committee has no doubt by now picked up. It is addressing an anomaly, in essence, and it's hugely important to keep focused on that fact, because the way that the representations have been developed is along the lines of revisiting the grant of the licence and decisions that were made back in March. This is a quality proposal by Mr. Glicksman, and it has been granted. We are exclusively concerned with this particular condition, and it's really the one condition as opposed to two. And it's an anomaly that turns on alcohol and table meal, and that is what the committee will really need to focus on, and that's what my representation earlier was all about. What real difference does it actually make to make people eat food, how much food we don't know, with alcohol, as opposed to people enjoying a glass of wine or a beer or whatever else it may be in the context of sitting in Mr. Glicksman's proposed restaurant in the future, looking out over the sea, or for his current survival. And of course, that is the context of this application. And that is also hugely important, because the committee need to make the decision as things stand now. And Officer Dimon referred to the Hope and Glory case. It's a very important case. He picked up on a relevant paragraph. It's in the applicant's pack as well. It's Lord Justice Toulson's paragraph at 42, which explains, as I said earlier, the 360-degree nature of a licensing decision, in which the views and the wishes of local people are important, but they're not exclusive. And the importance of stimulating demand, the importance of local economy, the importance of providing a service, the importance of local business are all relevant considerations, that they're not to be disregarded, but it keeps coming back to this condition. Now, Ms. Lane for Environmental Health told you that this application was all about the effect on licensable activities. That's not correct. It's very closely the effect of this application the effect on the licensing objectives of this particular condition. So to spread it out wider and say that this becomes something to do with controlling noise in the courtyard, controlling behaviour or limiting it to 9 o'clock, that goes too far, as the committee have no doubt picked up. And in actual fact, the planning permission becomes relevant again, because if that has yet to go through, Officer Dimment said removing this condition automatically gives the right to turn this into a pub. Well, it does not, because the planning use is A3, which is not a pub. So regardless of the decision of this committee today, that control remains. These premises can only be a cafe restaurant until planning say differently. And so that control remains, and that is to be decided another day. That's hugely important for this committee to take into account, because they are absolutely not giving the right for these premises to be a pub or an exclusive drinking establishment or a late night establishment by affecting this condition. The condition relates only to the ability to trade within the planning control. So A3 at the moment, the application, and I refer to it because Ms. Lane again referred to it, the application for planning is for mixed use. And again, it's planning, it's not licensing, but just to be absolutely clear about that, what that means in a mixed use is that you must maintain a balance of both. You cannot turn exclusively to one or the other, because then you change your use class and you're in breach of your planning. So in terms of questioning Mr. Glicksman's motivation, the very fact of the mixed nature of the planning application tells you what he wants to do. But quite frankly, as a reputable businessman in the locality, he's entitled to be believed on his own terms. He's entitled to have credit for what he said to you. He's never been demonstrated to be anything other than straightforward before. As I say, he gets involved in community events, he gets involved in community charities. He has told you what he wants to do with the premises to survive in the short term, but to trade effectively in the long term. If for any reason in the future that becomes different, it becomes something that he said it would not be, at that point, there is a review application, and that is something else that is very important that comes out of the case law, the same case law that Officer Dimment referred to. The reason licensing can be a light touch regime and you can say yes and give the benefit of the doubt is because there is always that facility for the police, for environmental health, for any one of the residents to come back and say that hasn't worked out. And here is the evidence. And that's the word that the officer used over and over again. You need evidence. And that's what would occur if you needed to make a review. Then the officers, environmental health, police, whoever else would be able to come back and say, we have evidence of something that has gone wrong. And at this stage, we can revisit hours, we can revisit conditions, we can revisit the scope of the license, we can do all sorts of things. At this point, as the officer has made very, very clear, there is no evidence, and Mr. Glicksman is entitled to be taken at his word. This is not a sleepy seaside cafe environment. I'm informed that there was a nightclub very close to this location some time ago. That is now no longer there. This is a preferable option to a return to a nightclub or a pub, which Mr. Glicksman says he will not do. But in any event, sleepy seasides, as your corporate priorities no doubt continually remind you, do not fare very well, and they do not fare particularly well coming out of a global pandemic. And in terms of recovery and in terms of boosting local economy and paying for local services and local resources, you need successful businesses that will pay their tax, pay their rates, provide employment opportunities. These are not insignificant considerations at this point in time. And essentially, that decision has been made in March. This is just tying up a loose end, nothing more, nothing less. Need, as you know, is not a consideration. The removal of the condition in reality will make precious little difference to the decision that has already been made. And I commend it to you in the hands of a man who knows what he's doing. He's highly experienced. He's got no blemish against his name. He's got a tried and tested track record. This isn't an unknown speculative venture. You can balance it against the other premises that he has in the town and judge him by what he does, not just what he says, and have the confidence that these premises will actually become the very attractive proposition that he has, exactly the kind of place actually that local residents may very well appreciate as and when they come to fruition, hopefully when economic times are better, and it will become that friendly local restaurant that people are proud to have in their town. That's the situation at this point in time. That's the reason this condition needs tidying up, because it's a problem. It's a problem for everybody, including the enforcing authorities at this point in time. And that is why this application has been brought to you, and I commend it strongly to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Mr. Glixman want to add anything to that?
No, thank you. I think Ms. Clover has said everything I needed to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That ends the representations. Thank you all very much. The members of the subcommittee will now leave this meeting along with the council's legal representative to deliberate this matter in private. We shall resume here to deliver a verdict in 30 minutes' time. Whilst we leave the meeting, I will ask the committee services manager to explain the retiring process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. What I will do now, for benefit of the members of the public watching on the council's YouTube channel, is I will be stopping this stream. The stream will remain, the YouTube stream will remain live, and it will come back on again in half an hour's time. So that is 12:12. So I shall stop the stream now. Excellent, Chair. Over to you. We're all live and up and running again.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Welcome back, everyone. I would now like to invite Gavin Happ, our interim senior litigation lawyer, to read a summary of the subcommittee's determination.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. The determination of the subcommittee is as follows. This was an application to vary premises licence number LN 2005-118 relating to premises known as St Mildred's Bay, Beachroad-on-Sea, Kent, CTA 8AD. The applicant, Mr. Paul Glixman, represented by Ms. Sarah Clover, has applied to vary his premises licence by way of deleting two conditions which are currently on the premises licence. 1. Intoxicating liquor shall not be sold or supplied on the premises other than to persons taking table meals there and for consumption by such a person as an ancillary to his meal. And 2. It is an implied condition of this licence that suitable beverages other than intoxicating liquor, including drinking water, shall be equally available for consumption with or as an ancillary to meals served in the licensed premises. In considering this application, we have concentrated on the substance of this application. The subcommittee's remit on this occasion to consider other issues, including the hours of operation of these premises. The subcommittee has been informed that an agreement has been reached to which two additional conditions have been proposed and agreed by the applicant. These conditions are: 1. All off sales of alcohol shall be supplied in non-glass containers, with the exception of any sale of alcohol that is for delivery via a delivery service, or any alcohol the customer may not have finished and wishes to take home, i.e. an unfinished bottle of wine. And 2, the hours of off sale shall be limited to between 1,000 hours and 2,200 hours, 7 days a week. We have heard or received evidence from the applicant, the Environmental Health Officer, Kent Police, the RNLI and a number of local residents, including a considerable number of written representations. We also note that the Westgate-on-Sea Town Council support the application. We have paid very close attention to all of the material and evidence which has been put before us. We note in particular the local residents have a genuine concern regarding the potential for the operation of these premises to result in noise outbreak, causing prejudice to the prevention of public nuisance licensing objective. And we do not minimise those concerns. We've also noted the guidance issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003 stipulates that we should accept the advice of the police on matters relating to the prevention of crime and disorder. The police have made it very clear that there is no evidence which would indicate that any of the licensing objectives would be prejudiced were this. We accept that Mr. Glixman is an experienced operator of licensed premises, running as he does bistro without complaint. We understand that the applicant intends, once the restrictions occasioned by the coronavirus did, to operate the premises as a high-end bar and restaurant. In all the circumstances and having considered all of the evidence before us, we are satisfied that this application can be granted, subject to the addition of the two conditions agreed between the applicant and the police, which we consider to be appropriate, proportionate, and necessary for the promotion of the licensing objectives. We are satisfied the Licensing Act 2003 provides sufficient safeguards, including the mechanism to review the premises licence in the event that the operator of these premises should fall short of the aspirations Mr. Glixman has put before this subcommittee today. That's the decision of the subcommittee. It will be circulated in full within 5 working days. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you to everyone. That concludes the business for this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee.